My name is Joe Paul. I'm the Managing Director for the Los Angeles Regional Reentry Partnership. It's my distinct pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. We are very excited about what we're going to present to you this afternoon, and the panelists, the distinguished panelists that will bring their subject matter expertise to address the issue of reentry during a pandemic. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you the Executive Director of the City of Los Angeles Civil and Human Rights Department. She is my friend, my sister. She is a longtime civil and public servant, and she's been appointed to various positions around the city through two mayors. And we are now having the distinct opportunity to see her lead this wonderful operation in making sure that, in light of all of the civil unrest and the disparity between racial inequities, that she will allow the city of Los Angeles to be a trailblazer in remedying some of those issues amongst the most vulnerable among us. So it is my absolute honor and distinct pleasure to introduce to you the Honorable Attorney Capri Maddox.
Thank you so much, Reverend Joe Paul, for that gracious introduction. And most of all, thank you for being my friend for so many years. I really just wanted to share that the Civil and Human Rights Department is here to serve the community. We were started recently, and I was appointed, of course, by Mayor Garcetti, as you said, in February of 2020, before the world kind of, went in different directions. And I think it's important for us to know that we care about equity and empowerment. And that is something that are very important. Those are two things that are really important for what we're doing. The Civil and Human Rights Department really kind of came to be with support from Council District 1, Gil Cedillo, as well as Council Member Wesson. And so we appreciate their leadership in this space. As you know, thousands of people are being released, unprecedented numbers, and we are just concerned that we have resources and tools to make sure that these individuals have been set up for success. That's why we have the expert panel here to just let people know that we have resources and tools, whether it's how to deal with finding a job or dealing with the COVID crisis. So it's a privilege for me to introduce our next speaker, who will be joining us by video, Congresswoman Karen Bass. She was trained as a physician assistant, founder of Community Coalition, that's doing great work in Los Angeles, as well as the opportunity that she has now to serve as our Congresswoman. And she's really, been a star there. She's the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. And of course, recently, we all know that she was shortlisted. She was on the short list to be the vice presidential candidate. So we're just so proud of her. She is a public servant. She's my hero and my friend. And with that, I'd like to introduce the Honorable Congresswoman Karen Bass to share words with you. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Karen Bass, and I'm proud to represent California's 37th Congressional District, and I also have the honor of chairing the Congressional Black Caucus. It is truly my honor to welcome you to the City of Los Angeles Civil and Human Rights Department Reentry During a Pandemic Forum. As a fifth-term Congresswoman and lifelong Angelino, I am proud to represent the same area that I grew up in. In the 1990s, I convened local community activists and founded the Community Coalition. Our goal was to transform the social and economic conditions in South LA. This amazing organization is celebrating 30 years of fighting the good fight for justice in South LA, and I've always been a keen advocate of working alongside community members in justice-serving advocacy work. As a member of the House Judiciary Committee, I've worked to craft sound criminal justice reforms, as well as protect intellectual property rights infringements that threaten the economic health of the 37th district. That means the entertainment industry, very, very important for the industry. But I also believe that incarcerated individuals deserve a second chance. They deserve to be rehabilitated so that they can have paths to employment and housing when they're released from prison. I don't believe it's right that people are sentenced essentially to life. You serve your time in prison, and then when you get out, there's so many roadblocks, it's like you continue to be incarcerated. So during my time, I authored the Success Act, which played a pivotal role in the passage of the First Step Act and highly supported Proposition 47. As your Congresswoman, I pledge to continue to fight to ensure our criminal justice system is fair by continuing to work on legislation to improve the quality of life for those in prison once they're released. Thank you for this opportunity to share with you in this much needed conversation.
Wonderful. What an honor to have remarks to open this event by someone that has been as frontline in the issue of change and racial equity as the Honorable Karen Bass. And so it is my distinct honor this afternoon to moderate this panel and to guide the discussion that hopefully leaves this audience with more answers, or at least a clearer understanding of how resources are being deployed and allocated to address the issue of returning citizens from either our local county jail or our state prison system, and then all the other supportive services that go along with that. So I thought it was fitting to share a couple of remarks from our County Board of Supervisors back from June, when they began to address the obvious opportunity that the pandemic had unfortunately presented. And that opportunity was the effect of the reduction of our county jail and also subsequently our state prison system at an unprecedented rate. We had averaged about 17,000 individuals in our county jail system on average for a long time. And in a matter of 60, 70 days, that population dropped by 5,000 individuals. And so as a result, our Board of Supervisor Janice Hahn, our Board of Supervisor Margaret Lee Thomas co-authored a motion that was designed not only to examine what could be done to sustain that, but actually really coordinate the public safety system of LA County to really coordinate something that created a long-term and sustained momentum around those releases. And so these comments, I think, will set the tone for where we're going today. So Janice Hahn was quoted from LA Sentinel from June 11th to say, "Our jails have been overcrowded for decades, but the last 2 months have proven that many people have said for a long time, there are thousands of people in our jails who do not need to be there." Margaret Lee Thomas echoed her sentiments and said, "The county must build on this unprecedented progress in keeping the populations down in our jails, down from 17,000 to 12,000 individuals in less than 2 months, by rethinking how to safely serve thousands of individuals in a more cost-effective, rehabilitative, and humane manner." He went on to say this as I conclude: "It took a pandemic to alleviate overcrowding and get us into compliance with the state's requirements, which is a powerful statement about the criminal justice system's resistance to change. Yet we remain undeterred. This is the right moment for the county to renew its commitment to ending over-incarceration, expanding incarceration, and scaling the work of the Office of Diversion and Reentry, and addressing racial inequities." How befitting for us to actually have the Los Angeles County Civil and Human Rights Department, others around the county, and ODR even represented on this. And so without any further ado, I want to introduce to you our panelists, and I want to give them a chance to get their screens on. So first, I would like to introduce Mr. Reggie Jones Sawyer. who is our 59th Assembly member. We have Judge Peter Espinoza, who's the Director of the Office of Diversion and Reentry. We have my friend and my dear brother, Mr. Doug Bond, who is the CEO of Amity Foundation, and the wonderful Ms. Shirley Torres from Homeboy Industries, who's the Chief Program Officer for them. Welcome this afternoon, and it's good to have you guys. If you could take yourselves off mute, it would allow us to be able to talk pretty freely. It's my intent to just allow our questions to be very organic and allow your responses rather to be very organic. You've been presented several questions. Hopefully you've had a chance to review them and absorb some of the content. I really appreciate each one of you. I did some homework on all of you just so I was more abreast, and I'm very, very happy to be able to moderate this panel and extract from you the brain trust that each one of you represent. So for me right now, giving you guys a chance to introduce yourselves a little bit more thoroughly than I have, it would allow our audience to really be a little bit more acquainted with each one of you. So Judge Espinoza, would you just give a little bit of backdrop to who you are, what the Office of Diversion and Reentry is, and then I'll move on to the next panel.
Sure. My name is Peter Espinoza. The title is confusing. I'm a retired judge of the Superior Court. I've been retired for 5 years. I left the court to take the position as the director of the Office of Diversion and Reentry. It was an amazing segue from one career to another, and the work that we do at ODR couldn't be more different from the work I did before. I will say I'm an LA native, born in Boyle Heights, been in LA County my whole life except for some time away for college. And so I feel very connected to this community and very committed to the work that's being done here. Thank you.
Amazing. Good to have you, Judge Espinoza.
Thank
Doug Bond.
Yeah,
What's up,
thank
my
you,
brother?
Joe Paul. How you doing?
Yes,
Good to see you. It's an honor to be on this panel with everyone and to be discussing this subject. My name is Doug Bond, Chief Executive Officer of Amity Foundation. Amity Foundation has been a service provider for 50 years. It's just celebrated 30 years of serving California, certainly with reentry services. We have a wide range of services that range from treatment to housing, employment services. We actually work with the Office of Diversion and Reentry on how to utilize their services for people cycling in and out of the county jail. And a big believer in making sure that our organization represents the men and women we serve. I myself was actually brought out of foster care by the founders of Amity Foundation and reunited with both my parents that were incarcerated. So definitely understand the indirect impact of incarceration and the generational cycles that can be changed by that through the appropriate services in the community.
Yeah, you have an amazing testimony, Doug, and your organization is doing a fantastic job. Good to have you. Mr. Assembly Member, Reggie Jones Sawyer, good to have you, my brother.
Good to be here. Assembly Member Reggie Jones Sawyer, 59th Assembly District, representing South LA, Huntington Park, Walnut Park, and Florence Firestone. I am the chair of Public Safety for the State Assembly. I also used to be the chair of Public Safety Budget. So I probably know more about prisons than I ever wanted to in my entire life. And I've probably been to more prisons than I ever want to go to in my entire life. And so I have a pretty good grasp of what's been going on. And so what I'm working on is really trying to close the school to prison pipeline. Because if we choke it off at the beginning, there'll be fewer young people coming into the prison system. And if we open up real wide, rehabilitation programs in a significant way, fund them, make sure they're working, shine a light on accountability on all of these, then we'll have a successful way of getting people out. Just real quick, when I came in 2012, we were looking at 140 to 170,000 people incarcerated. Now it's down below 100,000 into the 90,000. It's because of the programs that we've implemented since I've been here since 2012.
100% correct. And we'll probably deal a little bit more later on regarding those population reductions, but well said, sir. Ms. Torres, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good.
I'm Shirley Torres. I am the Chief Program Officer for Homeboy Industries, which is the largest gang rehabilitation program in the nation and in the world. We are a place of hope and healing and support for those that are at the margins and the most demonized. folks who we know have the highest barriers to reintegration, and we provide them with employment, but a place of sanctuary and healing, a place that they can call home, and a place where they can re-identify with who they are in the world. We also operate 9 social enterprises, and we have a global homeboy network across the country and across the world. We have folks who gather together, who have visited us, and have tried to be the beacon of hope that Homeboy has been for the city of Los Angeles.
Amen. Father G has a wonderful quote that is pretty ubiquitous to the work that we've been doing in this county and across the country, as you just mentioned. He said, nothing stops a bullet like a job. Mm-hmm. And I think some of these things that we're engaged in our discussion today will really affirm some of those sentiments that your organization has lifted up for a long time. So it's great to have you. Thank you. So just for context, you guys, we didn't try to overload you. I'm sure we could have asked a million questions and you would have fielded them amazingly. We tried to keep this pretty narrow to the context of our convening today, the issue of an unprecedented global pandemic that has created so much devastation across the world. Here in California, our wonderful governor has managed with others to really try to stem the impact of deaths and suffering that the pandemic has laid to other parts of the state and around the world. But we now know that those coming out of custody have really fared the worst in times with some of the things that are needed, like housing and other supports. And so some of our questions are going to deal with these things. So we're going to jump right into it. I want to create a space where I can ask the question, give each one of you some time to respond if you feel comfortable with it. If you don't, we'll move on. But I certainly want to give each one of you a time to share from your distinct perspective what your thoughts are regarding the questions we're going to be asking. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, so let's jump into this. So in light of the reduction of the correctional populations at our county and state institutions due to COVID-19 and the historical lows that we're seeing in terms of those populations respectively, what creative funding for housing have you recognized is supporting the safe and effective transition of those who are being released? And Doug, I would love to kind of open the floor with you because you've been at the helm with others in this pretty unprecedented public-private approach to returning home well. Your agency is spearheading across the state the deployment of those resources. So I think just for context, to kind of jump straight into it, if you can kind of lean in, how did that evolve? How did, the conversation between what BSCC, the Board of State Community Corrections, had offered initially, and then those other philanthropists that came on board, how did we get here, and what can people expect in terms of resources being distributed in community?
Yeah, thank you, Joe Paul. So we started off with the early releases that took place, the 3,500, and using existing infrastructure and networks to help place those 3,500 men and women returning home. We further in June and July started getting confirmation on another 8,000 men and women being released, and through that effort started working in partnership with the governor's office, the administration and legislature, as well as philanthropy on this. Amity was able to contribute an in-kind for its infrastructure and for being able to leverage what we had already in place. Given the time frame, we had to leverage existing networks. So the Specialized Treatment for Optimized Programming Networks, Center for Employment Opportunities was doing a distribution of stipends in the community for men and women reentering into the community, and then worked with the Anti-Recidivism Coalition to then subcontract for transportation services with community-based organizations that were doing pickups from the prisons and getting people home safely. And so we worked as a coordinating agency for that, also the fundraising lead with philanthropy to get these resources in place. The administration graciously was able to contribute through the BSCC $15 million through that effort, and we were able to expand our existing networks which serve over 200 community-based organizations throughout the state to add beds, additional reentry and recovery housing beds. A report that went to the governor last week highlighted that we have seen about a 78% increase from last year to this year in usage of the reentry and recovery housing beds, and about a 29% increase of the overall network's total, serving a little over 6,000 men and women returning home. And the unique part about this project was that we were both able to serve men and women on parole and probation. So there's an enormous amount of coordination that had to take place between state government and local counties, 58 different probation departments and service providers, trying to figure out how do we do this? How do we make sure that we add in this, linkages for probation? We have done this for the state system for some time, adding the component in that we allow men and women on probation, which I think was a tremendous part of this effort, and ensuring consistency in service delivery as part of this resource. So we've already distributed a lot of these resources out into the community, and will continue to through those networks of infrastructure. And the goal for our goal and Amity's goal on this was not to just do it for the pandemic. We needed this for a long time in our community. Ending mass incarceration is going to require an enormous investment in community infrastructure and additional resources for housing, for treatment, for services in the community. So our goal is to make sure that we see this as a long-term plan to build on the network, to really help men and women come home and close prisons, and make sure that we're both addressing this at the front end with diversion, but also winding down mass incarceration by having appropriate reentry alternatives. And it truly is a collaborative effort. This is not a one agency effort. This has been amazing to see all the organizations that really do what they do well, working in partnership and coordination together.
I love it. And just while I'm at the state level right now, before I move to Judge Espinoza, Mr. Assembly Member, you're sitting at the chair of pretty much the center of the eye in terms of our state legislature when it comes to this returning home well and some of these other options that the state, Governor Newsom particularly, and the BSCC leaned in on. But to Doug's point in terms of sustainability, what do you see from a legislative point of view based on all these wonderful, collaborations that have really, showed up to create access points for safe return of our men and women coming home from state prison? What thought do you have in terms of, your particular role and your colleagues' role at our state legislature to really create avenues of real thought that could sustain this opportunity that unfortunately COVID has created?
And thank you. And this is a real important thing. So when I got elected, through the wisdom of the voters, instead of only having 6 years, I now get 12 years. And what that means is when it was just 6-year terms, someone could go ahead, write a law, maybe get more beds, celebrate, and then run for another office. Now, if the program doesn't work through an audit or investigation or something bad happens, I'm still in the legislature. It still falls on me. I have to follow up. And so what I've been advocating, I worked for the city for 25 years. I'm a recovering bureaucrat. I'm just going to tell you. And when I worked for the city, elected officials would make a law. They would foist it on me to make it happen. Sometimes it wouldn't give me enough resources, money, and sometimes it was just a dumb idea. But I had to implement it. And what I would do is wait until that person turned out, and we used to say in government, and this too shall pass. And then we take that money and then do it what we want to. Now we need to put in place mechanisms to not only say, you need to get this done by a certain time with a certain amount of money, but we will audit you. We'll shine a light on you. If you listen to Doug Bond, you asked about beds. He told you about wrapped around services. If you talk to Homeboy, the Homeboy Services Network, they talk about wrapped around service. They just don't have somebody at one of the Homeboy industry places serving coffee, just serving coffee. You need mental health. What if they're dyslexic? What if they're bipolar? Maybe they can't read. So you need some educational component. What if they had some trauma? You got to have that component in there. You got to have it wrapped around service. You just don't say, here's a bed, lay down, have a good night, and then you go to work tomorrow. No, you got to have a mechanism for them to find a job, how to do that. And so from the legislative standpoint, we've got to look at things a different way. We no longer can create AB 123 or SB 123, do the confetti, take credit for it, pat ourselves on the back, woo, and then run for another office. We can't run from our legislation anymore. We've now got to be accountable. So that now I have to make the service industry accountable. And I have no problem with once you have them, but there's a lot of smaller ones that don't have the capacity to do that. And we've got to get them up to that so we can better serve people, not only just the housing part, but just the whole rehabilitative part. And so that's our responsibility. So I'm trying to write in the legislation now that we have funding and resources on the implementation. I would love to, I've been a bureaucrat and now I'm an elected official. I can tell you with all honesty, it ain't me now. It's not the elected officials who make the difference. It's the people that implement it. And if anybody tries to tell you anything different, they are lying. There's too many great programs that have fallen by the wayside because we didn't give enough money and resources. And sometimes it's just a stupid idea that we didn't totally flush out. And so I think that's where, from a legislative point of view, that's where we need to go to now.
I like it. I like it. Makes a lot of sense. Judge Espinoza, I'm going to turn the question towards you because some of the great work that ODR is doing locally to support particularly inmates that are coming home that have been affected by mental illness or co-occurring disorders that need bed space and housing. Your department and agency has really done a fantastic job working with local community-based organizations, just like Mr. Reggie Jones Sawyer just said, in terms of implementing these resources in community. What would you say to that question in terms of creative funding for housing that the county has been doing?
So let me just contextualize my response by saying that we're in the middle of an historic shift away from incarceration here in Los Angeles County. As you know, the board decided not to build a new jail last year, created the Alternatives to Incarceration Work Group, which was a rare, I'm sorry, I've got some plumbers here if you can hear that doorbell ringing. A rare collaboration between county officials, nonprofit providers, and community activists and representatives. It resulted in a report with 114 recommendations. In addition to that, I will say that the Office of Diversion and Reentry was created with the firm belief that there are folks in our LA County Jail that don't need to be there. They're there because they have a serious mental illness or a co-occurring disorder. And we believe that if they came out with the proper support and services, that they can thrive in the community. We can improve their health and wellness outcomes and reduce recidivist behavior, which is at its core a public safety. It's a public safety strategy. Don't let anybody tell you that it's not, that we're releasing dangerous people and that the community is being threatened by our work. Our work is very much a public safety strategy. As to funding, I will say that in response to the COVID pandemic, the CEO allowed us to create 211 emergency beds that were used for people who were being released from the jail in response to the pandemic. And I know we're going to talk about jail populations. I'm not going to go into this too much. But what is happening on November the 3rd is Measure J is on the ballot. And Measure J is a county measure that will deepen investments in the work that we're all invested in here, or that we're talking about here, ensuring that 1 out of every 10 unencumbered dollars that come to the county is invested in services and economic development in the communities most vulnerable to the justice system. So I'm not promoting because I'm not allowed to promote. I can tell you how to vote on Measure J, but I will tell you that is the sort of view of what Measure J will do. And I will say, currently ODR's Reentry Division, and I know that our Director of Reentry Services, Vanessa Martin, is at this meeting today. The work that they do is so critical to supporting people coming out of the jail, those who don't have a serious mental illness. Our clinical team does the work with people who are really acute in terms of their clinical needs. But our reentry division relies exclusively on state funding, Prop 47 recidivism reduction money, SB 678 money that we get through the probation department. Measure J will allow us to expand our work, our reentry work, with people coming out of the jail and even people coming out of state prison to meet these service needs. So I would be looking carefully at Measure J as you get ready to submit your ballot.
A great answer. And it kind of leads back to the assembly members' thought around implementation, right? We have all these circumstances that, and Doug also, and you've been like a champion at the microphone, at least, Doug, in terms of really speaking to, it's not just about getting people out, but it's about successfully getting them out and giving them sustainability. So Ms. Torres, I see you shaking your head. Do you have any thoughts to this question?
I guess that what I was thinking in my head, we had a recent trainee who was recently released from prison after serving 30 years and is out and is coming out to a closed city, county, state at some level. And she had just turned down a job that paid her $21 an hour. And she said, the best part of Homeboy is the home part. And before I can have a job, I need this place. And so I think a lot about communities and our responsibility to not only provide wraparound care, but to provide human connection and human companionship at a time when we've been hit with sort of these parameters of being safe, but how that safety is not afforded to everyone, especially those on the margins. And so I think about sort of the resources and how exciting this is to have folks like the Assemblymember Joan Sawyer and Peter Espinoza and Doug working on the resources, and there's pressure on community-based organizations that are also facing a kind of disinvestment at this time in our pandemic that is important for us to recognize so that we can continue to reimagine a Los Angeles that raises the bar on really affording safety and home to everybody, especially those coming out, and that we recognize not just the structural barriers, but the social and emotional barriers to reintegration that require us to be a community of kinship and love and human companionship.
You know, you raise a great point. I appreciate it. Even in our conversation a few days ago in prep for this meeting, you just raised very sentimental thoughts that humanize this whole experience. It's not X's and O's and widgets. These are human lives that we're really managing. And I think to the assembly members' thought, even from a political or legislative point of view, this is not just about another X of an approved piece of legislation that became law, but it's about how does that really affect the life and the family and the communities that these individuals are returning home to. And Judge Espinoza, it just makes me think about the DOOR site, the developing opportunities and offering reentry solutions that your organization is so intimately connected to, and the resources that the probation department, ODR, and other community-based organizations like LAARP are all involved with ensuring, even during a pandemic, the individuals have a place to tap into, to create some kind of continuity of putting some boots on the ground and figuring out what direction to go without having to run all over the place and potentially exposing themselves to the virus. Could you share just a few thoughts on the resources and the direct support services that are out in community that really allow people in this particular point in time coming home? You know, they weren't necessarily supposed to come home. You know, Doug, the rolling releases that the state has offered and so forth, what Shirley and Wave in our public safety system has worked to release folks, getting us down this point. How does DOORS play into this? How does that resource really connect the dots for some of the things that we couldn't have prepared for?
Sure. So, you know, during the pandemic, the county jail population was reduced by a third. 5,000, give or take a few inmates, were released over health concerns. And so a number of those, and I think the number was around 1,700. I don't really remember. I'll probably get a text from Vanessa Martin any minute. a number of those people were connected to our services through the jail reentry work that goes on with whole person care and the Office of Diversion and Reentry. As you know, the Doors project is a one-stop community center on Vermont across from the Coliseum that has a number of service providers available on site. The problem, of course, is that during the COVID pandemic, like all public offices, it's been closed. So people can't just walk in now and meet with service providers. So we have established a modularized live call schedule that clients can call in, speak with an ODR team member, complete their enrollment and assessment documents via phone as opposed to having to come directly into the office. We're working directly with center providers to repurpose their contract dollars to purchase digital devices to loan to existing clients, right? iPads, hotspots, to allow their clients to engage in the work that they need to be engaged in during a period of time when they can't have contact with our staff or with our providers at the Doors Center. And by the way, the Doors Reentry Center is the first of its kind in LA County. And I'd like to invite everybody on this panel, particularly Assemblyman Joan Sawyer, to come and see it. It is really a thing to see, a thing of beauty, to be able to walk in and receive services from a multitude of organizations on site. It's a one-stop center. And lastly, we are preparing an all access at Doors launching event. At the end of this presentation, we're going to put up a slide that promotes this event, where we will be putting all services online on a virtual platform, groups, orientations, classes, provider service appointments, etc., and distributing iPads and hotspots for enrolled persons on that day. So it's one of the many projects that ODR is involved in that I'm incredibly proud of, and I would invite everyone on this panel to come and take a tour when they get the opportunity when we reopen our doors.
I think the Assembly members has graced the doors of that site right around the launching of it. Is that right, Assembly member?
That's right.
That's true.
I apologize. You were at our opening. I remember now. You were with MRT.
That's
Yeah,
right.
that was.
That's right. And so, Ms. Torres, just to wrap this thought up here, how has Homeboys pivoted at this point in time within, you know, the social distancing and the stay-at-home orders to ensure that your population and the clients that utilize your services still have access?
So we actually, we first closed down and pivoted to have sort of virtual connections. We're having over 900 weekly connections with the 200 to 300 clients that we employ in our 18-month model and in our social enterprises to make sure that they were still having access through FaceTime or devices to their classes and to their mental health therapy appointments. But we also knew that there was folks that were transitioning. They were either completing programs, they were moving into sober livings. And so we did have a team that safely was still sort of crisis response and was rolling up their sleeves to deliver safely food to folks that couldn't move. They were delivering refrigerators. And with the support of COVID emergency relief that we've received from private donors and foundations like CCF, we're able to really meet all the basic needs so that everyone had what they needed. That was the first 7 weeks. We saw lots of resilience. We had homies that were teaching us about how to do, how to do house arrest and, what to read and what exercises to do. But over time, what we saw was the need for us to actually check and take a deeper look and look at people. And we were very blessed that the city of Los Angeles, as it reopened its doors, designated Homeboy Industries as an essential business, as a gang rehabilitation center. So we're able to come back. Our essential workers came back. We have 9 teams of case managers and navigators, peer navigators who've graduated our program, who've transformed their pain so they stop transmitting it and walk with people and individuals. And so under COVID and safety regulations, we are operating, our doors are open. We have Father Greg, who is also seeing folks as they're coming out. We've been engaging them and connecting them to the wraparound care that folks have, but we've also been giving them a dose of Homeboy. We've used the State Historic Park, which is in proximity to Homeboy, to take walks. And we've just figured out a way to give a small drip of the Homeboy community, even with the constraints, because what we have seen was, and in my 20 years of experience working with our population, I haven't seen this level of desperation, of anxiety, of depression, of loneliness. And when you think of the definition of crisis, it's the collapse of coping mechanisms. And so if you understand that, then you know that people who, lean on us for family need us to show up during this time. So in safe ways, I've been really just honored and blessed to serve with our direct service providers who are on the front lines, and who they themselves, 50% of our case managers and our staff members here were all once clients. And now they're holding the door open for others. And I've not seen so much grief and loss during this time. We've lost many people without an opportunity to properly grieve together as community. We've gotten innovative in rolling up our sleeves to try to do that virtually and walk with folks the best ways that we can. But we're trying to be innovative in this time. What I will say is the importance of purposeful activity matters. The men and women that we have touched, the healing that they started before this pandemic has had a ripple effect, I think, in how they want to be part of building community. And so when we saw that there was food insecurity in our communities, we pivoted to partner and use our social enterprises, and with support from public and private funding, we're able to launch our Feed Hopes initiatives, and our trainees and our cafe and our staff showed up every day to prepare 2,000 meals a day and then deliver them to the homes of folks that are facing the most food insecurity and that cannot leave their homes. And that kind of innovation allowed for people to feel like, wow, I can roll up my sleeves. This is my community, and I can lean in. And that kind of purposeful activity ignites a hope in people that allows for dignity and respect and earning a livelihood in a way that they are otherwise excluded from.
Well said, first of all. Kudos on all the work that each one of you are doing. I think it leads very perfectly into the next point. And you made me think about, and I want to say it's Abraham Maslow. I think it's Abraham Maslow. He said that suffering minus meaning is despair. Suffering minus meaning. And when you can add some sort of understanding in the context of you can't change the circumstances as they are, but you help people manage through it, build that resiliency and so forth, as you so eloquently said, it really can help, especially our population that quite often has these sort of traumatic effects, even in spite of the circumstances that a pandemic can create. So I really appreciate what you just said. And it leads to the next question. The reentry community is at an elevated risk for social isolation created by COVID-19 and its impact. So without being able to visit libraries, community centers, or even these reentry hubs physically, and also that typical digital divide that they already have quite often, especially folks that have done long-term sentences, have been lifers and just never even had a chance to watch this evolution as far as technology is concerned. What are some of the best or available practices that you're aware of that can meet those needs? I mean, you've just addressed some, Judge, you addressed some, but Doug, I would like to hear like what you guys are doing at Amity de Los Angeles, particularly. What kind of remedies or solutions to these issues are you guys seeing? And then I'll ask the rest of the panel.
Yeah, I think Shirley mentioned some of the things that are really important. And I appreciate all the feedback, just everything that community providers are doing. I know for us, we've had to be very thoughtful in that process because we do residential services. So rethinking space, rethinking how we interact, doing that safely, making sure that we have people coming out that have done 35, 40 years sometimes. We just had a gentleman that passed and worked for us for 5 years after doing 32 years. and had 36 grandchildren, you know, and the ripple effects of that in the community, and how important that is to do that, making sure that family reunification is an important element of this, and that we don't forget about all the other parts, as Assemblymember mentioned. It's not just a bed. We do far more than that in the community. That we really have to think comprehensively. And reentry is not just one intervention. It's a multitude of several combined with multiple groups as well. So for us, it's really partnering with groups. I'll say FQHCs like Kedron have been heroic in their efforts and working with us, making sure that we're doing regular testing, making sure that not only our students are safe, but our faculty are safe as well, because they're going in and out every day and present a risk as well to the men and women we're serving at the campuses. Rethinking, you know, through tablets, of course, we've had to add an entire element that's done virtually. We actually are working in subcontracting out and providing services at quarantine sites. So what does that look like for individuals keeping people safe that have experienced COVID, and making sure that they're safe and the rest of the campuses are safe? So really thinking through having visits with family members at a park and being outside, and how to do that safely, and how to make sure that we don't replicate an institutional mindset, and that we stay really community focused during this time, but also keeping people safe. So that's involved a lot of process through this. We've been able to distribute a little over $3 million of reentry stipends to the men and women we serve through philanthropic, the kind of donations of philanthropy, and groups like Center for Employment Opportunities, other community-based organizations, which has helped alleviate coming into an environment where employment is almost non-existent for some men and women coming out right now. And how do we rebuild? And what we thought may have been growth sector industries, say in hospitality and other areas, now have to pivot. And how do we retool to put a focus on that? So we're thinking through it on multiple stages. I think the other point that was brought up was technical assistance to smaller community-based organizations. We're sharing a lot of information with other groups, and what's worked well, what we're doing well, what they need support on. Distributing, I think we've distributed over 65,000 units of PPE to the community, and making sure that we're providing safety net for people. We've distributed a little bit over $700,000 in clothing that we've got from in-kind donations. And so it's not just being about Amity, it's about the larger community, and how do we think as a whole. I'll say the most important thing that I've seen through this is really everyone stepping up and saying, what can we do to help? And how can we be a part of the solution on this? And the other part of reentry services too, and I think Shirley touched on this a little bit, is that the majority of men and women that are providing these services in the community are formally impacted themselves, and how important that is. And organizations truly need to demonstrate that through their hiring practices and who they serve in the community, and making sure that the management represents that, the staff represent that, and that we're really my most dedicated faculty are those that have been impacted in the community. And those are the ones that have helped lead these efforts to make sure people are safe, you know, going to safe distancing, what that looks like to still be able to interact, but also being able to do some of the fundamental humane things that we need to do in the community, and doing so safely during this time.
You know, and thank you. That was very well said. And it just brought up, you know, I put on my Rev hat right now, and I'm thinking about the scripture where it says, to him who's been forgiven much, they loveth much. And we fall into that when you speak about individuals who've been impacted by the system, have recognized that their debt to society has been a consequence of their behavior, and they make the proper adjustments to reacclimating at least to some form of pro-social behavior. And it's just good to hear from you, Doug. I mean, obviously you sit on our executive committee with LAARP. You bring those great ideas and the innovation to the table every month. And I'm really grateful to have your thought in the community. I'm going to move to our next question. Our time is winding down very quickly before we get to our Q&A with the audience. And I think this would be a great question for us to really move into before we conclude this portion of the event. The state of California, through its Department of Corrections, has spent about $81,000 per inmate to house adult prisoners annually, and that's according to the Legislative Analyst's Office for 2018-19. Similarly, this year, 2020, the LA Sheriff's Department's budget for its jail system is about $190 million, according to the LA CEO's office. Why is legislation such as Measure J, Prop 15, which is the Schools and Communities First, so critical in reallocating or equitably distributing funds? And I'll start with you, Assembly Member, just from your role at the state level and in making sure that these resources are at least brought to the forefront and seeing how it goes. What are your thoughts on that?
I think this is the first try, at least stab, at trying to not only redirect the fund, but how to redirect the fund and where to redirect it, how much we should allocate. Because just saying defund the police, there's no there to it. I think we all can agree there needs to be some redirection of funds, and we always shake our heads.
Yeah.
But then when you try to get into the weeds and the detail, it becomes really, really difficult. And I also think we need to, even in that context, even with Measure J, that we also need to revamp how we use, for example, I'll use formerly incarcerated. Look, Judge Espinoza and I might be really gifted and smart, but if you have me and him try to teach the rookie Lakers center that's 7'2" how to be a center for the Los Angeles Lakers, that's going to be an utter disaster. But if I get someone that's formerly incarcerated, that's changed their life, but we have these rules in place that said you can't hire formerly incarcerated to go into the prison and try to pull people out or to be part of these programs. Doesn't that set us up for failure? Aren't the greatest people who can show us? Because look, I can almost tell none of us have probably been in jail or definitely not in prison. So we're doing this work out of love, but I don't have a whole lot of experience. And so I need help from someone that's been incarcerated so I can make the best law. And so, yes, Measure J is the start of this, and we need to do more of it. But we've got to tell the public, probably most important, we got to tell taxpayers. Are you listening to me? We got to tell taxpayers, not just lip service of, we're going to divert money over here. We got to tell them how we're going to spend their money. And we got to be able to come back every year. This is back to my accountability, to say that it's working and this is why it's working, and have measures of success. So we need to start with that from the beginning to the end. I've read Measure J. I don't quite think they're really there, but I think we can add it once it gets implemented so that we have the most robust rehabilitation program. And you know what? If we're really open-minded, it may involve some law enforcement who are willing to make that change. Who are willing to do the law enforcement police renaissance, especially the younger law enforcement folks who may not have been jaded over the years that they need to act a certain way. And that could be part of Measure J could be part of the renaissance of law enforcement itself, especially if we find people who want to be involved in this in a more productive way. And so I'm looking for answers on how we move this forward. And I think if we tell taxpayers how we're going to move this forward, not only will it be voted on resoundingly, you'll probably get more people involved. And guess what? Now the wraparound services will include people who know what they're doing.
And I appreciate that. First of all, I'm going to go back to something you said just a brief minute ago. In a former period of time in my life, I was known as inmate E22842 in the California State Prison System. I was one of those violent offenders that typically don't get access to services as frequently as the non-nons. So I appreciate the fact that God is so good to transform lives to where you can't even see the harm that was created at a period of time. So I really appreciate that. I think also, and I'm going to lean into Judge Espinoza with a comment that you made, Assembly Member, because ODR has been at the front line of really creating that pathway for formerly incarcerated people through your community health workers design, through whole person care and things like that. What has been the experience from your organization and those, that have had access to hiring based on those fundings that you put out there, Judge, that really have demonstrated that those, closest to the problem really do have a lot of the solutions that can remedy a lot of the things that others can't? What's
Sure.
that experience been like for you?
Well, let me just echo Assemblyman Jones Sawyer's comments. I'm from the government and I'm here to help you is not a philosophy that we employ at the Office of Diversion and Reentry. All of our work is done by community-based providers, many of them that are operated and run by people of color. Many of those people of color have justice experience. We have 100 community health workers that work on contracts that we support, all of whom are credible messengers, all of them who have justice involvement. Our firm belief, echoing what the Assemblyman said, is that I can't teach a 7-foot center how to be a center in the NBA. And I can't, as well-intentioned as I might be, I can't go to Homeboy and tell people how to reenter. I just can't. It takes someone that's had that experience. And so our philosophy is to look for and support programs that use people with lived experience.
I want to thank you guys. This portion of the conversation has just been amazing. I have a tremendous amount of respect for each one of you, directly or indirectly. And I just want to say this, and I think I would be remiss in terms of Mr. Troy Vaughn, or Pastor Troy Vaughn, who's our executive director for LAARP, who's been at these tables and been in these discussions and in these rooms as a person of lived experience for a long time at a high level. And so it's so good to see the system catching up and seeing that there's an equitable distribution of intelligence and experience that balances out, the typical, where we talk about data sets and evaluations, but we really miss where the continuity is for folks really closing gaps that really make a difference for the long run. So really want to thank all of you for your comments. We're going to move to taking some questions from the audience, and you guys can pick them up however you need to. I'm going to grab a couple for my Q&A here. Let's see. All right, we got a question here. It says, I'm a housing coordinator with Brilliant Corners on the ODR team. Is there any indication that ODR or similar programs will be expanding across California or even to other states? Do you think the public opinion about these programs are becoming more positive and will garner the financial and political support necessary to sustain the programs long term? And I'm going to use you, Doug, to speak on it because you're in multiple states. You're working across the whole state of California. You just quarterbacked a masterful thing called Returning Home Well. So what do you think about these ODR and these types of programs that could really offer, even to our last question? Do you see it?
Yeah, I think they're best, I think we should be sharing best practice. So I will say that Returning Home Well is a statewide effort. LA, of course, being a third of the men and women returning home, represents the largest portion of that, but this is being replicated in counties throughout the state. And we want to make sure that we're not just focusing on one area and forgetting all the other communities throughout the state of California. So that effort is taking shape. And I think for, programs like ODR, we work in Arizona as well in Pima County. I know that they're looking at pay for success initiatives and social impact bonds. I was just on the phone yesterday with the head of the MacArthur Foundation and the Illinois Department of Corrections and their state, and talking about how do we replicate what we've done with Returning Home Well and share best practices. I know that we often look at a lot of the things that aren't taking place in California, but I can assure you, as somebody that works in multiple states throughout the United States, California should be the model of how we're providing reentry services in the community. And there are a lot of states that do not have the same opportunities for men and women that are returning home. And our goal should be to replicate those models successfully. And this public-private partnership really had the intent to do that. I know philanthropy wanted to make sure that they're replicating this in other states, that it's not just for California, it's not just for LA, that we're in rural parts of the state, underserved communities throughout the state, and we're taking those best practices and those mechanisms to really replicate this and ensure that we can safely return men and women home, not just for the short term of 6 months or a year while they're in a program. We want people to stay out for years, and we want to see generational impact by this. And I'll just end by saying I'm glad that Judge Espinoza and Assemblymember Sawyer are not coaching the Lakers as we go into Game 5. we're at a critical point right now in the playoffs. But I think to their points is that, we really do have to support and show, and that's going to take a huge investment in workforce development, a huge investment in infrastructure in the communities. And this effort really has been led by men and women that have been impacted, like yourself, Joe Paul, and like others in the community. And I think that these are things that we have to look at in other communities to allow for men and women to be hired on programs to go inside of prisons. Community health workers, as ODR allows us to hire men and women that have been impacted. As an organization now, I will tell you, we don't accept funding that doesn't allow us to hire men and women that are formerly incarcerated. And that is something for us that we have to stand up and make that demonstration. And that's one of the first things I will tell any state or any county or group that we're working with if they invite us to provide services in their community.
I love it, Doug. I love it. Great answer. Thank you, audience, for that question. Judge, I'm going to direct this next question to you. It really is in light of this political season we're in and one of the programs that your office is holding. So the question is from Connie Taylor, and it says, what are we doing about the men and women that want to vote and can vote? Can they vote? There are women and men on Skid Row also that do not have transportation to vote. How are they being assisted here in California? What would you answer to that, Judge Espinoza?
Not sure I can answer that question directly. I'm going to answer it indirectly and hope I can get some support from other panelists. Through the inspirational leadership of Mark Ridley Thomas, ODR was directed along with the county recorder to create LA Free the Vote, which we did, which is a program that is intended to educate and encourage people with justice involvement to register to vote. Most people who've been convicted of a felony assume that they can't vote. That's in fact not the case. Most people who have been convicted of a felony can vote. They can even vote while they're in the Los Angeles County Jail. And so we have been about the business of registering voters and training our partners in the community to register, to educate and register voters. We've registered more than 1,500. We're now ballparking it. We're hoping to hit 2,000 before the election. And we have trained more than 475 people who engage with the justice community, the impacted community, how to educate and register voters, not just educate them on how to register and how to vote, but educate them on the things that will be voted on this election that should be important to them because of their experiences. And so I'm very proud of that work. And once again, that work is being led by Vanessa Martin's reentry team at ODR, along in collaboration with LA Voice. They've been an amazing partner. So that's my kind of answer, but I can't talk about getting people to the polls exactly or actually going into the weeds in Skid Row to register voters.
No, I got it. And, I love the fact that there is a circumstance that has been codified into our system where individuals that normally have been left on the fringes, left with this misconception that they're disenfranchised, but nevertheless do have access to the polls, that this has been just a ubiquitous conversation. LA Free the Vote has done an amazing job. Before the pandemic hit, we were inside of the jails registering. I think we had pretty much the largest opportunity just at the primaries in registering individuals with Vanessa and Tasha and the whole team. My team, shout out to Joseph Pettit, for the great work that we did at that point in time. And even now, Zach Hoover and the team with LA Voice, it's a real countywide concerted effort of getting people to vote and getting them educated on the processes and even down to what the propositions represent. So thank you for your answer, Judge Espinoza. This question is coming from one of my really good friends, Miss Eileen Hongo. She says, I work in a reentry facility, and regarding jobs that require some type of licensing, in other words, caregiving, health, etc. And often the justice involved may spend time, money on the academic aspect, but often are stalled at licensing. Will there be change in this aspect? And I'm gonna turn that one to you, Mr. Assembly Member.
Some of it is already started.
Yes, it is.
Again, when I came to the assembly, we used to have this archaic, I might say stupid, concept where if you're incarcerated, and this is apropos because we have the fire, and you worked on the fire line, some of them have lost their lives. You put your life on the line to fight these fires. You can become more proficient or as proficient as a firefighter or fighting for wildfire. And you're in the breath of it. And then you get out, and we have a law that says you can't be a firefighter. But they've trained you. You probably have better training than someone that went to a community college and learned fire procedures and fire policy and all of that. But you don't have any experience.
Mhm.
These young men not only have, and women, not only have experience, but I'm gonna say, I can't repeat this over and over again. They put their lives on the line for California. And they, whether you're in the military or anything, when you, or even law enforcement, when you put your life on the line, I think we should make special compensation. That law, I came in 2012, I tried to get it done, others have tried to get it done. This is 2020, 8 years later. Governor Newsom just signed it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Just signed it, okay? So that they can become firefighters and in a middle-class working environment. And where I'm concerned, we're helping heroes. We're allowing heroes to become firefighters. Firefighters are heroes by themselves, but now we're adding additional heroes to the ranks. We should be looking at others. There's another stupid law. There are people cutting hair in prison right now. Joe Paul can
Yeah.
They're pretty darn good at it.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
That are really, really good at it.
Yep.
But they can't get through the
Get a
barber
barber
license.
license. That's right.
What
Yeah.
are they afraid of that someone will do to your hair? And I'm just talking barbers. I haven't gotten to hairdressing and
It'll grow back in the worst case
I'm
scenario.
just talking about cutting your hair, maybe putting some design in it. That's about it. You get a shave. And now they use safety razors. It's not like they're using. So we've got to go back and look at all of those. I've even been asked about real estate license for formerly incarcerated. Some of them were pretty good con artists. What if they had put that towards selling a house or doing cold calling, doing anything legally, and then we give them the certificate, Now, if you're a bank robber, you can't work for a bank. Okay. So we do have boundaries here, and you probably can't do stock. So yeah, there are some things you probably can't go back to, but some of the things that I've mentioned, we need to. I'm gonna go back, and I think I can get the governor, for example, barbering. My father was a barber, so I would love to go back and figure that out, so we can get more formerly incarcerated, especially when the pandemic ends, and to be barbers and hairstylists and beauticians, and that's an entrepreneur startup business. You don't need a whole lot to start that up. So
Yeah, and I would just add that I think about how employment is tied to identity. And for someone whose identity, it's been in many instances, the folks I meet have spent more time in prison from juvenile detentions and graduate into different systems. They've been incarcerated more than have been out in their lives. And so I think this idea of identity. Think about our own lives and how much folks are attached what they do for a living with who they are. It's not everything, but it's part of your identity. And if we can't give folks a legitimate pathway to earn a living, then it's challenging for them to then attach to what's out there for them. And I think part of what Assemblymember Joan Sawyer highlights is sort of the purposeful ways in which laws have excluded people of color and communities from being like full participants of community. And I think if we are, I think, you know, this pandemic and civil unrest has removed the scales of our eyes to really be in line with the reality of the progress we made, but the progress and the opportunity we have to reinvent Los Angeles in a way that gives people of color full participation in building their communities. And what we see and what we are trying to do is figure out how are we accountable as a community and a society to challenge our notions of the perceived enemy for all of us, no matter what our stance is. And how are we accountable for the years in which we've criminalized the poor? And how do then we use this time to, yes, redirect funds and resources, but partner and integrate systems so that we minimize the hoops that people have to jump through to make a livelihood and to afford people wellness. Oftentimes, we are complacent, and we've been complacent with cognitive, you know, development, changing people's thinking or behavior. But what we have to think about are the implications of trauma, of re-traumatizing folks, not just in their own homes, but in schools, in communities and institutions that have been, that have really, really afforded people this sense or had people believe that they're not worthy of a livelihood. And people believe that. And I think about, imagine if we use this time to believe that those at the margins who live there, who live and who have chased death, can actually have a pathway and be part of choosing life. And that's where Homeboy has sort of set up shop. We're trying to figure out, how do we offer a glass of water to someone that's thirsty? How do we offer purposeful activity and a way to make a living, and do that by minimizing the hoops that people have to jump through? And I think for us, the things that we know for sure people have not been afforded is an opportunity to heal, because it costs too much and it's complicated. You know, what we are talking about is the opportunity for us to redirect funds in a way that not only includes people with lived experience, but also allows people the kind of dose that helps them unpack their trauma and start their lives. And that breaks cycles of violence, of incarceration, of generational trauma, because it makes parents available for their own children. I've never met a gang member who wants the same life for their own kids. Amen. And I think that we have to think about developing healing practices and sanctuaries that transcend the buildings that we build. When you invest in people and you build community with people, then they carry that and they create that everywhere they go. And I've been witness and privy to that. And my life has been saved by the men and women I serve, because I've been at the epicenter of that. And I think this is the opportunity we have at this time to work together, to integrate our systems, to redirect funding, but to also pay attention to how are we being accountable to the years of legislation and damage that we've done to keep people as not give people the opportunity to fully participate in our community.
Well said again, and I mentioned this at the beginning of this conversation today. You bring a very strong sentiment into the discussion. So as we prepare to wind down, I'm going to throw a thought out there, and when I conclude this thought, I'm going to ask for you guys' final thoughts too, and we'll keep our remarks fairly short because I want to bring Capri back up to close us out. But I'm going to read a quote from Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, because I think it's appropriate, considering not only the loss of life from COVID, which drew us into this discussion today, but all of the loss of life from law enforcement, from community in this post-George Floyd era and others. And at the declaration of that Gettysburg field, Abraham Lincoln profoundly said this. He says, "It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave their last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, that the government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth." And I think that those words still resonating extremely true right now in this moment in time. So I want to start with you, Judge Espinoza, your final thoughts on today's events, what you would want to leave with the audience. And again, I want to save a few minutes for Capri before we wrap up. Oh, you're on mute, Judge Espinoza.
You know, I do that in about half the meetings I attend. I start talking and people are waving their hands and sending me text messages. I just want to point out, echoing what you've just said, Joe, about some of the important work that's taking place in Los Angeles County that not everybody is familiar with, but should be. As a result of the reduction of the daily census in the jail from over 17,000 to below 12,000, the Board of Supervisors leapt into action with 3 motions. The first was a motion that ODR and the Sheriff's Department collaborated on to develop a strategy for maintaining those historically low numbers. So we've already submitted that report. The second motion directed us to create a strategy for the board to close Men's Central Jail within 1 year. Men's Central Jail was constructed in 1965. It is a dungeon and, by everyone's account, an inhumane place to hold folks. We are deep in the weeds on that work. But another motion was passed 2 weeks ago by Supervisor Hahn, and it created, I don't want to misstate it, it created the Population Management Review Council. And that council was chaired by the Office of Diversion and Reentry, and it consists of a number of county partners, community-based organizations, community activists, and other partners. And our job is to review the data every month on the jail and who's in and who's getting out, to review that data through a racial equity lens, and to advise the board on what steps need to be taken to further reduce the population. We are within striking distance of reducing the population sufficiently to close Men's Central Jail. The population has crept back up by 2,400 folks who are on a waiting list. Assemblyman Sawyer to go to state prison. And the CDCR is not willing to take them. It's not up to the sheriff who goes to state prison. The courts make those decisions. So we need CDCR to step up, get those folks on their way so that we can close Men's Central Jail in a timely fashion. So I just want to leave everyone with that. That's, I think I have covered the work of ODR in terms of our reentry work. I could talk for hours about that, but I just wanted to leave us with those thoughts.
Wonderful. Thank you, Judge Espinoza. Assembly member, what would be your final thoughts?
And mine will be a little bit shorter. Look, I'm someone whose work has led to a point where people have even endangered my life by putting a target in law enforcement, a certain section of law enforcement. So I know, one, that I'm on the right track of what I'm doing when people are that desperate to try to stop me. I'm not a martyr, but you did read from probably one of the greatest martyrs we ever had, Abraham Lincoln, who was moving in a direction that a lot of the country didn't want to go into. But it was the right thing to do. And so I would like to tell everyone on this Zoom call to continue to fight, no matter what anyone says to you, no matter what they do to threaten you, no matter what they do to stop you. And as one of my mentors said, John Lewis, constantly get into a whole lot of good trouble.
Yes, sir.
Please
Yes,
get into as much good trouble as you can to
sir.
further this cause, because we are just the embodiment of it, but the movement is way beyond these temporal bodies, way beyond it. This movement is going to happen no matter what.
Amen.
So let's be warriors in that fight.
Amen. Some good trouble. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Assembly Member. Ms. Torres, what will be your final thoughts?
My final thoughts are really about our continued commitment to stand with the demonized so that the day comes when we stop throwing people away. I know when we started at Homeboy, we used to get bomb threats. It's a place that started with a prayer. And over time, I think we definitely have been part of shifting suppression efforts to this sort of crossroads that we're at, where we're talking about investing in people. And I just, I really want to invite people to continue to not just make noise, but make change. I think that our commitment to offering people a sanctuary in which they can heal and earn a living is important. We're part of a national cohort to develop quality jobs for our population coming home. And we would love to partner with more government organizations to support work like Homeboys, but other community-based organizations that are doing the good work at the margins and have been relentless. And I do think the stakes are higher than ever before for the men and women that are coming home because so much has changed in the last few months and in this year that I think the implications and the need for allies is greater. And so our commitment to and our opportunity to do something different is prime time for us.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And last but not least, my brother, Doug, what will be your final thoughts?
Yeah, I think we're at such a critical time in our communities. I know when we started doing this work 30 years ago, we were building prisons, not shutting them down. So it's amazing to see that we're closing places like Bend Central. We've closed, all the MCCFs will close this year in the state. No more out-of-state private prisons. We're closing the first state prison that was just announced about a week ago, which is incredible. And we have to continue to build that as a community and build community capacity. We have to continue with alternatives in the community and make sure that that infrastructure is in place. So I just can't thank everybody that does this collectively. It's not one organization that does this, not one government entity. It truly is the embodiment of collaboration in the community. So it's just incredible to be a part of this initiative and watch it change and evolve over the years. And as we move into a place where we're seeing less people incarcerated, that we continue to extend the pathway. Because one thing that really didn't get mentioned in this, but as you know, I'm a big advocate for, is there's a lot of children that are represented by all the men and women that are incarcerated. And if we don't change that cycle now, we want to make sure that we don't impact, for every 100,000 men and women incarcerated, there's roughly about 300,000 children represented. So just knowing that and knowing all the family members that are impacted by that what we do is far more important than any one individual, that it represents a whole community behind it.
I love it. I mean, I want to just thank all of you for your warm thoughts and intellect. And without further ado, I want to bring back into the conversation the fearless leader of the Civil and Human Rights Department for the City of LA, Capri Maddox.
I thank you so much, Reverend Joe Paul, and thank you for moderating this panel. I mean, it's just, an amazing group of folks. Of course, Judge Espinoza, someone that has been regarded for so long in this space. And of course, Doug Bond, you're someone that I've heard about, and just to see you in action and know all that you've done. And of course, Shirley, Torres, joining us from Homeboy. I just, love your energy and, your service. And of course, the Assembly member on the call, I'm just so grateful for my friend, Assembly member Reggie Jones Sawyer and his family. What I wanted to say, echo one thing from Shirley's point about how we remove the scale from people's eyes. And this is not, a one-time thing that the Civil and Human Rights Department will be doing. Wanted to let you know that we want to be of service to our community in so many ways. I'd like to thank our staff, Nicole, Jamana, Candace, and of course, our beloved Nason Buchanan that is leaving us soon to go work with Brotherhood Crusade as a vice president for the Boys and Men of Color program. But the thing is that we hope to continue to work with him on our upward mobility efforts. And in that upward mobility effort, we want to support people into the middle class and beyond, but to heal people's traumas, meet people where they are, and allow them to live at their full potential. And not just so much for them, but for us as well, because we need all people. And this virus has taught us that, we need all the help we can get in this land. And I also wanted to just echo the fact that this is about public safety. I'm a former prosecutor. I'm not in the courts in that space anymore. However, I am providing enforcement now for discrimination and bias. I'm anti-bias and anti-discrimination. So I think it's really important to set people up for success, not just to get people out, but to get people ready. And one of the last things I really wanted to say is we provide wraparound services for people after they're incarcerated, after they hit a roadblock. And I want to work with the Civil and Human Rights Department and our partners like yourselves to make sure that we provide wraparound services for people early and often, because we don't need to wait until there's a collapse for us to stand up. And it's an honor to stand with you, and I hope we can do more work together with the Civil and Human Rights Department. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.